the president said that we can start. Many people will join later on. Now, first of all, thank you very much for being here with us tonight. We have, on behalf of the Wharton Club, who organized this meeting, this webinar, we extend the thank you to everybody. And we have a very interesting topic, the breaking the silence in a conversation with Leslie Morgan Steiner, who is here tonight, and our moderator is a good friend, Claudia, who is on the screen, I think now. A very wise person once said that someone is sitting in the shade today because someone planted a tree a long time ago. And I'd like to have the honor to introducing you my very good friend, Leslie Morgan. We go back several decades on our time studying at Wharton. And at the time, I have to admit, I was not aware of Leslie's situation. And it was only later that I uncovered the depths of her narrative. And I admit my admiration for Leslie soared. And over time, we were friends, we became better friends. And I discovered that the girl that I knew, the bright, engaging, easy to talk person, now had a hidden second life. And I didn't really know it. Nothing was available to us to understand and to realize. And then she told us the story, and I realized that the girl that grew up into an aspiration that she embeds today. Now, Leslie started this journey long time ago. I remember her TED Talk in 2009, if I'm not mistaken. And today she has the wisdom, and she is able to navigate her realm and empowerment and her resilience to openly discuss the issues of domestic violence. Now, Leslie is unique. She is not the typical story that you hear from violence. She has an education from Harvard, a master from the Wharton School. She was an executive, firstly in Johnson & Johnson, and then throughout her career. So she was not a successful woman with a successful career, and yet she was an object of as she will tell you, this incredible violence in home. But she has a very soft thought, and she talks about the crazy love and the craziness of the love that puts you in this situation. So buckle up, as they say, and let's embark in this venture. Now, here with us to guide us through the exploration is our dear friend Claudia Pensotti, renowned journalist and editor-at-large at Class CNBC, who I thank you for being here. And please, Claudia, Leslie, I give you the floor, and thank you again for being here with us.
Thank you, Paolo. It's really a pleasure to be here, an honor, actually, because when you asked me to moderate this evening, and I first read up about Leslie and then spoke to her, I was very impressed with this woman. I mean, she really personifies strength and empowerment, and what she has done, which is, what she has done with a very difficult situation is absolutely amazing. So I'm going to let her tell her story. Paolo introduced her. Just so you know, Leslie went on. He talked about the TED Talk that was viewed by over 10 million people. She's written 4 books. She's a New York Times best-selling author, and she has really done an amazing job. And what really, as Paolo was saying, affects you is that she comes from such an incredible background in terms of her studies and her work. So, in the end, she was able to really do something amazing. So I would like to leave the floor to Leslie so that she can tell us her story. And we want you to know that you can ask questions. You can ask them, they will appear on the chat during the time that she's speaking, or even at the end when we do open up to the Q&A, because we would really like to involve you. So Leslie, I'll leave the floor to you.
Thank you, Paolo. Thank you, Claudia. And thank you, everybody who has come tonight. Thank you to the Penn Club of Italy, the Wharton Club of Italy, Emanuele, Monica, Sarah, everybody from behind the scenes, because it really takes a village to put on anything of this caliber. And I'm very, very grateful to be here tonight to break the silence about abuse, and hopefully to help other people who are currently struggling, and to help all of you learn more about it so that you can help people in your family, in your workplace, and in your community. Because the reason that I'm here tonight, in Italy in particular, is that in the past year, Italy really has experienced quite a growing awareness of how lethal relationship violence can be. And there have been several very high-profile tragedies of young women who were killed by their boyfriends or their ex-boyfriends. And there's also this incredible movie by Paola Cortellesi about There's Still Tomorrow, which really digs into, and in a very interesting way, how common abuse is and how it's always hiding in plain sight. And that's really what the main message of my story is that we tend to think that something as terrible as intimate partner abuse happens to other people. It doesn't happen to the people we love. It doesn't happen to the people we work with or go to school with. It doesn't happen to us. But what I learned is that it does happen to us. It happens to everybody, no matter your intelligence, your income level, your religion, where you come from, how much your family loves you, how well you do in school. It can really happen to anybody who falls in love, and falls in love with somebody who has been abused as a child, which is what happened to me, as you'll hear in my story. And I never, ever thought that someone would abuse me. I never thought I would stay with somebody who would abuse me. I was one of those confident young women who said, I would never stay with a man who beats me, because I just didn't understand how subtly it happens, and how abuse is really a psychological trap that is very hard to be aware of when you're in it. And I'm going to talk and tell you what happened to me, and then I'll answer absolutely any questions that you have, because I believe so firmly that being honest about this and breaking the silence is how we end abuse and how we get help to people who need it. And although it's a terrible story that I'm going to tell you, I'm not embarrassed about it or ashamed about it at all. And so please think of any questions that you want to ask me. So my story starts in my childhood. I grew up in Washington, D.C. in the United States. My father was a lawyer. My mother was a teacher. I had no violence in my family. And I was a very hardworking and ambitious young student and young woman, very, very responsible. And I worked hard, and I was lucky enough to go to Harvard College. And then when I graduated, I got a terrific job as a writer and editor at 17 magazine, a women's magazine in New York City. And I hadn't dated much in college. And so I decided that now that I was on my own in New York City, I was going to date a lot and have a great time, and maybe get married in 10 years, after I had really established my career. And this is one of the first lessons of abuse, is that you never, ever see it coming. And I met a wonderful, wonderful man in New York City. And he too had just graduated from an Ivy League school. and he had a very impressive Wall Street job. And he was smart and so funny. And he pursued me, and I started dating him. And before I realized it, I was really deeply in love with him. And I had never been in love before in this way. It was like falling off a cliff. I fell for him so quickly and so completely. And he made me feel really safe. He made me feel like, I mean, these are the things that he said to me. He said, you know, Leslie, you're the prettiest girl I've ever dated. He loved that I'd gone to Harvard and that I was smart. He totally understood that I was working at a magazine for teenage girls because I wanted to help them. He really, it's, if you think about the first time that you were really deeply in love and you let down all of your defenses and you had the thrill of uniting with another person and trusting another person, that's what I felt. And there was no sign that Connor was dangerous or angry or in any way a threat to me. And if you had said to me at the time that my boyfriend, who I loved so much, that within 2 short years, he would be holding loaded guns to my head and telling me whether or not I could wear makeup, whether I could see my own parents for Christmas, I would have laughed at you. It was ridiculous. And I would have said, no, you don't understand him. You don't understand how wonderful he is. And you don't understand me, because I would never, ever let a man hurt me. No man had ever hurt me, had ever hit me. And I couldn't believe that anybody ever would, or that I would stay for it. Because, you know, one of the many, many things that people don't understand is that abusers don't hit you on the first date. If they did, we wouldn't be here tonight talking about this. There would be no second date. We would have no problem with domestic violence in Italy or the United States or any country in the world. It's not the way it happens. And they don't, in my opinion, abusers do not want to be hurting you. They do not want to be abusing the people who they love. All of them were abused as children, and they have something very broken inside them. And for them, love and violence always go together. And it's very hard for them to realize what they're doing, and it's very hard for them to break the pattern, just as it's very hard for we victims. So I fell in love with Connor, and he asked me to marry him, and I agreed. And we moved to a tiny town outside of New York to begin our life together as a married couple. And at this point in the relationship, he had not ever hurt me. He had not yelled at me. He had not hit me. The first time that he beat me was 5 days before our wedding. And it was unlike anything that had ever happened to me in my life. He got angry over a tiny thing, nothing. And before I knew what was happening, he, you know, this man who I loved had put his 2 hands around my throat, and he was squeezing so hard that I couldn't scream or even breathe. And he was using the chokehold to hit my head up against the wall in the house that we were in. And he was screaming and completely out of control. And I was so scared that my entire body froze, and I had no idea. There was nothing I could do. It happened so quickly that I couldn't stop him. I couldn't fight back. I couldn't argue with him. And when he was done with this attack, he threw me down on the ground and he left. And I knew that I had to cancel the wedding. I knew that I couldn't marry him. I knew that I had to call the police, that I had to tell my parents. I knew all of those things. But I also knew that I loved him and that I wanted to marry him and that I believed in him and that he loved me so deeply. So I had a kind of conversation with myself where a part of myself said, but Leslie, he didn't really hit you. And it's true, he hadn't hit me. He had strangled me, but he hadn't hit me. And I knew he was sorry, and I knew that he would never, ever do it again, because this was just him being nervous about getting married. That's all that it was. And so I didn't tell anybody. I didn't call the police. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't cancel the wedding. And in fact, 5 days later, I put on my mother's wedding dress and I stood up in the church and I married him. And I married him with my whole heart and soul, knowing he was never going to hurt me again, that it was just something that had happened one time. And then he beat me twice more on our honeymoon. And this time he really did hit me. And my life very quickly went from being a fairy tale romance where I had just graduated from Harvard and met this wonderful man and, was starting a life with him, to being a complete nightmare. And nothing in my life had prepared me for this. I know it's hard to believe, but I didn't even realize that I was being abused. I would never have called if you had knocked on my door and said, we heard something last night. Is your husband beating you? I would have said, no, he's not. And I would have said, no, I'm not a battered wife. I am a strong, smart, independent woman. I am in love with a very troubled man. That's true, but I'm going to help him because that's the kind of woman I am, is that I love deeply and passionately, and I'm smart and I'm well-educated, and I'm going to fix him. And he had so many big problems that I couldn't help but feeling sorry for him. Even though he was so smart and well-educated and funny and loving towards me and believing in me, he had had a viciously terrible childhood where his stepfather had beaten him basically every single day of his life. And I don't mean that his stepfather had spanked him. His stepfather had broken his arm, broken his collarbone, broken his nose, broken his ribs, beaten his mother in front of him, which is the worst thing that you can do to a child. And Connor had grown up always associating love and vulnerability with fear and violence. And so the more that I loved him and the more that I tried to help him, actually the more it frightened him and the more it made him lash out at me. And I didn't understand any of this at the time. I just knew that I was in love with this man who about 49% of the time was my soulmate and the kindest, greatest person I'd ever known. And then 51% of the time was angry and out of control and violent. And my life got much, much worse once he bought guns, which in the United States, as we all know, are a huge problem. But in the state where we lived in at the time, they were perfectly legal and he was allowed to have them. And he had guns that he kept loaded all the time. And he kept one in the glove compartment of our car. He kept one in his pocket at all times. And he kept one under the pillow in the bed that we slept in every night. And he told me that these guns were to protect me, but they weren't. They were to scare me. And they did, because after he started getting guns, every single fight ended with him pushing me down and pulling back my hair and holding a loaded gun to a side of my head and threatening to pull the trigger. And even though he was doing this to me, I still loved him and I still wanted to help him, because I could feel that he didn't want to be doing this, that he wanted us to be happy, that he wanted me to help him, but that he was so damaged from his childhood that he couldn't he couldn't put the anger aside. And I didn't know anything about the patterns of abuse. And so I didn't know the terrible truth that this was just going to get worse and worse and worse. And that by not breaking the silence, by keeping a secret, and by not telling anyone what was happening behind closed doors, that I was risking my own life and that I wasn't making things any better for him either. Now, things took a very big change, and fortunately, a very positive change, when we both decided that we wanted to go to business school. And I have to tell you, the truth is that it was not my idea. I was a writer, and I loved being a writer. And I had worked at Harvard Business School when I was in college, so I knew what a powerful degree getting an MBA from a top US school was. But I had never thought it was something that I was going to do. But my husband wanted to do it very much. He was in business. He had worked in investment banking for Wall Street firms, and he really wanted to get an MBA, and he wanted me to do it with him. So he convinced me to apply, and we were very, very lucky that we both got into Wharton Business School, and we went there together. And that is where I met the wonderful Paolo Alberoni. And that's really why I'm here today, is because my life intersected with Paolo. And as he said at the beginning, I kept the violence a secret from everybody at Wharton. And, they knew both of us. It was unusual that we were a married couple there, and we had lots of friends, and no one knew what was happening to me behind closed doors when I went home at night. And my husband would get angry at the smallest things. He would get angry if I got a better grade than he did in one of our classes. He didn't want me to be in study groups with other men because he was so jealous. And Wharton was 70% men, and I had to be in study groups with other men. It was a torturous existence for me. And it was killing me being with him and being in love with him and hiding it from everybody at Wharton and lying to everybody, to my family, to my friends. No one knew. I was so incredibly alone. And I had no idea what I was going to do and how I was going to get out of this situation. But I give a lot of credit to the community at Wharton Business School, because Wharton made me feel really good about myself. Wharton is a wonderful place to be a woman and to be an ambitious woman. And everyone from my classmates to my professors to the administration there to recruiters, they gave me the message again and again and again that women are equal to men, that we should have the same opportunities, and that I had a really promising future. And although no one knew that at home I was being destroyed, the positive messages that I got every day at Wharton really, really helped me and saved me. And it also helped me. This is the terrible truth, is that my husband kept getting angrier and angrier and angrier and more out of control. And there was one night after a year and a half at Wharton, when we only had about 6 months left to go before we graduated, where he beat me so badly that I knew he was going to kill me. And I was unconscious for most of the beating because he kept strangling me into unconsciousness. And he barricaded me in our bedroom, and he beat me terribly. He broke pictures over my head so that I had glass all over me. He kicked me, he assaulted me. I really felt that terrible feeling that I hope nobody else here has ever felt, which is that I was going to die. And it wasn't that I was going to die because I was on a plane that was going to crash or a car that was going to crash. I was going to die because the man who I loved more than anybody on earth was going to kill me. And that night changed me. And I was very lucky I survived that night. And I also was lucky that I was scared enough or courageous enough that night I called the police, which I had never done before. And I was fortunate that the police took my side and believed me, and they helped me keep myself safe. And thus the second part of my life really began that night. I finished getting my MBA from Wharton. I got a job very far away from my husband. I began the very heartbreaking process of telling him that the marriage was over, that even though I loved him, I couldn't stay with somebody who was beating me, and that we had to part ways. And it was very difficult to do that because I still wanted to help him. And believe it or not, I still wanted to give him another chance. But I knew that I couldn't let him kill me, and that is what was going to happen. And so I started over. I was 27 and just starting out in my career. I invested in myself and my work and my independence. I ended up a few years later remarrying a man, the type of man who would never hurt anybody. I had 3 children with him. I had a very successful career at Johnson & Johnson and the Washington Post. And along the way, I decided that it was really important to break the silence about what had happened to me, that I needed to explain to people how this was not a self-esteem issue. It wasn't something that happened to poor women or stupid women or women with too many children, that it happened to everybody, that it happened to smart women and strong women, and that it happened to men too, because men can be abused as well, that it happens to children every day, and that this is actually a problem that is hiding in plain sight in front of all of us, and that we all have a responsibility to help people like me. And the only way you can help us is if you understand what abuse really looks like and what it really feels like, and that it's not these terrible monsters who are openly angry and openly awful people. They're not. They're people just like me and you, people who were abused as children and who have never gotten the help that they need. And they take it out on the people who love them the most. And it is a tragedy, but it's a tragedy that we can all help end just by talking about it, just by breaking the silence about it, just by telling our own stories, and just by asking questions. And I went on to write a book, Crazy Love, about what I went through. And the book was a New York Times bestseller, and I started being asked to speak all the time about my experience. And trust me, I didn't want to speak about it. It was the worst relationship of my life, and it had caused me intense agony and fear and heartbreak. But I felt like I had an obligation to speak about it because I didn't have children with my abuser, and he didn't have any power over me. And I was very free in many ways that most domestic violence survivors are not free. And also because I was alive, because I had survived, I thought I had an opportunity to tell the truth about what happened to me in a way that people could understand. And then I also did a TED Talk on why victims stay, which is a really important subject because people ask all the time, it's a very natural question. Why doesn't she just leave? Or why doesn't he just leave? And the answer is simple, but hard to understand at the same time. I didn't leave because I loved him, because I have a big heart, because I wanted to help him. And a lot of people stay for those reasons. They also stay because they have children to protect. They stay because quite often the police and family court judges or their own families don't believe them about what has happened, because the perpetrators of abuse seem like such normal people, because they are such normal people. So for all those reasons, I wanted to speak out. And I feel so very lucky to be doing this work now. It's not what I thought I was going to be doing with my life and my career when Paolo Alberoni and I were studying at Wharton together. It's not at all what I thought was going to happen. But I'm very grateful that this is what has happened to me. And I'm grateful to you all for caring enough to come here and to listen to this and to open your minds and truly even your hearts to the idea that this could happen to anybody. It could happen to you. It could happen to your sister, your mother, your children, your best friend, your son, because it does happen to all of us. And it doesn't look like what you might think. It's not that somebody is getting drunk and, punching somebody in the face as soon as the door shuts. It's not like that. It is very troubled people who are triggered by love and by intimacy and by family. And it's so much harder to leave and to give up on somebody who you love than most people realize. And by having sympathy for victims and even for the perpetrators of abuse, we all can come together as a society and help everybody get the help that they need. And I wouldn't be here today if I hadn't gotten help. I got so much help from the police, from my classmates, from my neighbors, from my employers. I was working at Johnson & Johnson at the time, and my bosses there were very respectful and supportive and helped me. They knew how much I needed my job. And I never had to pay a price for it professionally, thank God. And so that is my story. And we're going to turn it over now to the wonderful Claudia Pensotti to moderate a discussion and to answer any of the questions that you might have. And again, from the bottom of my heart, thank you all so much for listening to me and taking this opportunity to connect on a subject that means so much to so many people. Thank you all.
Thank you, Leslie. That's a very touching story. It really just hits a chord, also with what I normally do, this is a completely different type of interview that I'm doing tonight, talking about a topic that's completely different from anything because it is so intimate and it is so surprising, as you were saying. We tend to have an idea of the type of person that can be involved in a relationship that can turn into a violent relationship. And you don't think it's someone that studied at Harvard, that got their MBA at Wharton, and that has had such an incredible career, and that is a strong and ambitious woman like you. So that sort of brings me to my first question, which is, how can someone, because, that's what I'm seeing everyone is asking here is, what are the signs? What should someone be looking for if they do have a concern, or, maybe they don't even have a concern, but is there, an alarm bell that we should know, or that we should know about or see in a relationship or in a person when something like this?
There are several red flags that you should not ignore, that I did ignore. And when I read or reread Crazy Love, sometimes I want to throw the book across the room because I'm kind of yelling at myself, like, leave now. Can't you see it? Because it's so obvious. But when you're in it, it's not so obvious. The red flags are things like jealousy, possessiveness, wanting to tell the person that you're with what kind of clothes they wear, who they can talk to, who they can see, that kind of control. But I will warn people that it's very subtle, because what my abuser did to me is he said, look, I can see this because you can't. And when you wear those short skirts, it's not the professional image that you want to convey. Or when you look so beautiful without makeup, you shouldn't wear makeup. So he never came to me and said, look, I'm jealous and crazy, and I want to control you, so I'm going to start dictating to you these things. It gets wrapped up in love. And he also said to me, look, my last girlfriend cheated on me. And so in order to help me to not feel possessive, can you tell me where you are? And can you promise me that you won't talk to other men, especially men who you used to have a relationship with? So he wrapped this all up in me feeling sorry for him and me trying to help him. So the red flags are more subtle than you might think. But if you step back and see, this is possessiveness, this is jealousy and control. Other red flags are volatility, guilting somebody into doing something, and a term that is hard to understand, which is called gaslighting, which is when you you feel like your partner is making you sound to be crazy when you know you're not. When they deny something that you know they did, or when they say, no, I never said that, or you're the one who's crazy because I would never do that. That sort of thing, when it's something that feels a little bit off, you have to trust your instincts. And then I would say that two more that I just really want to underscore, which I alluded to a little bit before, but one is pity. You should never be expected to feel sorry for an adult who you're in a relationship with. That is a huge red flag. But pity feels a lot like love, and so it's really confusing. The other red flag is that if you are ever afraid to go home or dreading to going home, that's a red flag too, because home is where you should feel safe, not where you should be afraid. And I, very early in our relationship, I was really afraid when he would come home because I was afraid of what he was going to be mad at. I remember one time he beat me because I hadn't bought milk at the supermarket. He didn't ask me to buy milk, but he, it got to me that I was afraid all the time, and it happened so gradually that I didn't realize it. So I think those are some of the most important red flags, and they're easy to miss, believe it or not.
How did you talk to, you said there was that day that you called the police. And so at that point, the situation had gone outside of, your home. You had involved someone, but it was an outside person. So who were the first people you spoke to? How did you tell yourself you needed to tell someone that you loved and that loved you and that was close to you in order for this to be real so that you could then actually move on and do something and get out of it?
So that's such a great question, because a lot of people start to feel like maybe somebody they know is being abused, somebody they're very close to whose behavior has changed, or who is afraid in the presence of their partner, or who has bruises, and they don't know how to help. And I will tell you how you can help people, because this is what ended up happening to me. I did not break the silence on my own. I was confronted by a friend. And believe it or not, it was my husband's best friend from work who somehow sensed that something was wrong in our relationship. And he talked to both of us. He talked to us separately, which was also very smart. But what he said to me is, he said, Leslie, I've noticed that something has changed in you. And I'm worried about you. And I care about you. And I need to know that you're safe. And that's all he said. And that broke down my denial, because I realized I wasn't fooling anybody and that this person was really concerned. And so that was the first step for me. That was one of the things that I got very lucky with. And it's what I would encourage other people to do if you suspect somebody you love is being abused. Very gently and softly, you can say to them, are you okay? You're acting a little bit different. And I want you to know that I care about you and that I'm always here for you. That's all that my friend said to me. And as a result of that, I was also able to reach out to my best friend from college. And she is a pediatrician, and she really loved me. And I told her what was happening too. And she was similarly very kind to me. And neither one of these people told me I had to leave him. They didn't say that he was a monster. They didn't demonize him, which meant a lot to me because I really loved him and I knew he wasn't a monster. And they both just said, look, we're here for you. And that created a space for me so that I wasn't alone anymore. And I knew I had two people to go to.
But that's really interesting that you say, not to demonize the person, because if clearly that person is in love, like you were saying. So you have to be really careful how you step in. One of the questions that we got here says, how has going public with your abuse story affected your professional reputation? What happened there?
So, at the time when I was getting my MBA and just starting out, I was terrified that if recruiters and potential employers found out that I was a battered wife, an abused woman, that I wouldn't be able to get any jobs. And I also was so afraid that my ex-husband wouldn't be able to get any jobs too. And I didn't want to harm him in any way. And although the abuse was his responsibility, it was not his fault, because he had been abused as a child. He was a victim too. So I was really worried about it. But what has happened is that it hasn't affected me in any way adversely. I have found that people respect me for telling the truth and for being brave. And I feel like I have not faced any negative consequences from it. And part of it is that the world we live in is different now than it was maybe 50 or 60, 70 years ago, that people have a greater understanding that abuse is common and that it is not the victim's fault. So it hasn't hurt me in any way. And in fact, because of my honesty, I think that it has allowed me to connect more deeply with people who I work with people on my team, people who I manage. They respect it because nobody is perfect. And I think one of the worst things in the world, whether you're an employer or a parent or a friend, is to pretend that you're perfect. None of us are perfect. And by going public with my story, I've been very clear that everybody makes mistakes, and that that you have to look at everybody holistically as a whole person. So that's, I feel very lucky that it hasn't hurt me in any way. I'd say it's helped me.
So another question that comes to mind is, I was researching because we said, that we would like to give people information. First of all, later we do want to talk about the difference between Italy and the United States. But here in Italy, we wanted to give information as if someone knows someone that is in the situation, or someone is in that situation, they can call. It's a number, it's 1522, and there's also a website. It's the National Domestic Violence Hotline, and they speak every language, and it's open 24 hours a day. So that's the number to call, and those are the people to contact here in Italy. But what was interesting as I was researching this, the website, you open it, it talks about physical violence, but also sexual, psychological, and financial, economical abuse. So there's that aspect as well that is we're even less accustomed to hearing about and to admitting that it's actually going on. I mean, that kind of abuse, I guess, in with the work that you've done and the people that you've spoken to, how common is that, and what are the signs of that? I mean, is there more of that going around than we think?
Yes, there's so much more. I mean, abusive relationships that involve the type of abuse that I experienced, guns and extreme physical violence, are just a subset of greater abuse. And emotional abuse, psychological abuse, financial abuse, all of that goes along with any kind of abuse, power and control. Abuse is really, it's not about hurting the other person. It's not that these people are sadists and like to hurt other people. It's that they are trying very hard to keep themselves safe by controlling the person who they love. And that is a little bit to wrap your head around, that why would you need to control somebody who you love? But if you were abused as a child, or you're worried about the vulnerability of being in love with somebody, you're very motivated to control them. And there are lots of tools to controlling somebody. Controlling how much money they spend is part of it. Controlling who they talk to, controlling what they wear, controlling where they work, controlling how they feel about themselves. That's what emotional abuse is really saying that you are in charge of the other person's life. And it's very common. It's something that women do to men as well. It often starts with bullying as children, and then it starts in the very early adolescence when people start having romantic relationships with each other. Because obviously we all know you feel incredibly vulnerable when you love someone. And there are people who aren't secure enough to allow that to happen. And they feel drawn to controlling and dominating the people in their lives. And it's very subtle when it happens. And our society, the society in Italy and the society in the United States, in every society, we make excuses for it. And those excuses are really, really dangerous. And you see the excuses starting very early, like, well, he did that because he loves you. He does it because he's jealous. She does it because she's a little bit crazy, but she really loves you. Or even outright denial, well, there's no way that could be true because I know that he's such a nice guy. And I would caution everybody from having that knee-jerk reaction, because you really don't know what's going on behind closed doors. And if somebody comes to you and confesses that they are being abused in any way, your job is to believe them. You can ask questions later if you want to verify it, but the most important thing you can do for any victim is believe them when they take the very big step of coming to you and confessing that something is wrong in their most intimate, vulnerable relationship.
So we're getting another question, which is interesting. I'll try and kind of summarize it, but it's, have you come across fraternal violence, and do you have any insight on how society can protect vulnerable children, overwhelmed parents? And, they also talk about making sure that, someone who has been in a violent situation doesn't then become a violent partner in their life.
Right. These are really important issues. So the first thing that I will say is that the data shows that people who abuse usually were abused as children. That's where they learn it. But most people who are abused as children do not grow up to be abusers. Most people acknowledge what has happened to them, and they are not so damaged that they can't be in successful, productive, healthy relationships. And the people who are able to have healthy relationships after childhood abuse, it is because other people helped them. It's because they had teachers or another parent or an aunt or a friend or a family friend or a coach who believed in them and helped them. They had somebody who maybe wasn't able to stop the abuse at home, but at least was able to stand up for them and believe them and help them. Now, family violence is very common. I don't have the statistics on how common it is in Italy, but in the United States, it's more than 15 million children are abused every year. And the actual number is probably much higher than that, because those are reported cases. So somebody who is going to abuse their partner is also very, very likely, more than 50% likely, to abuse their children as well. And this is a really, really difficult thing to tackle, because children naturally love their parents, and it's a survival component that we need our parents. And so we're not going to tell people what happened, because children know they're going to get their parents in trouble. And there's a role for the police to play. There's a role for child welfare services and teachers and other people to play. But it's a very tricky thing to do, to stop the abuse and to prove the abuse. And then quite often, if a child is removed from an abusive family, they're put in a situation that is just as bad or worse. So it's a problem that has to be dealt with a lot of skill and delicacy in family court systems and other systems. And the most important thing is to believe the child and to tell the child that they do not deserve to be hit, and that you're there for them to confide in. Even if you can't stop the abuse, you can still help them with the emotional pain.
So we're getting another question. This is interesting. This is someone that was at school with you at the time when you were there, and his name is Kevin, was there, and when both you and your ex-husband, when Connor, were at Wharton. And he is asking, would you consider moving beyond the empowering women also to educating and engaging men in this process?
Yes. And I think it's incredibly important to help men who are victims as children, men who are victims as adults, and men who are perpetrators. And 85% of domestic violence is committed by men. And so it's not a women's issue, it's a men's issue. And we're never going to solve it unless we help men get at the root of why they're doing it, and to get them the support they need. And I speak very often to all male groups, to the US military, to all boys schools, fraternities, sports clubs. I really love talking to men about this, because they're very interested in it and curious about it. And also, I want men to become aware of the problems, because men have an ability to police other men and to help other men. And I also participated in a really wonderful documentary called Behind the Rage, which is interviews with men who have killed and hurt and are continuing to hurt their female partners. And it's a very powerful documentary and controversial because it's very disturbing, but to me, it's very enlightening and hopeful. And we're never going to end this unless we shift the focus from victims to perpetrators, and get them the help that they need.
So Leslie, what about the relationship with your children? I'm interested in understanding how the fact that you went through what you went through and actually then wrote the book about it, you know, how did that affect your relationship with them, and how do they feel about this topic also?
So that's one of my favorite questions, because we're so afraid to talk to children about difficult subjects, and it's really important to talk to them about it in appropriate ways. It was a little bit easier for me because I did not have children with my abuser. And so I wasn't saying anything destructive or negative about their father. It was about a stranger who they'd never met. So that made it easier. But I talked to them about it when they were very young. And I talked to them about it very simply and matter-of-factly, that I had been married before to somebody who had hurt me, and that you can't stay in a relationship with somebody who hurts you. So I had to leave him and get divorced. And my children learned a lot over the years from me writing Crazy Love and talking about it and then doing my TED Talk. And they know as much about domestic violence as I do. And they could be here. You could interview them, and they would give you very many of the same answers. And that's empowering for me, because I don't want to have any secrets in my family. But I tell you, one of the most beautiful things about this is that they have been able to help their own friends, starting when they were very young. Because if you think about it, a 10-year-old who is being abused at home, they are not going to come to you or me and tell us. They're going to come to their 10-year-old friend and say, my dad hits me, my mom hurts me. Or a teenager is going to go to their boyfriend or girl, their female friends or their male friends, and confide in them. So my children were able to help their friends because they understood abuse, they understand abuse, and they were able to say, I believe you, this is real. And if you want to talk to my mom, or if you want to talk to another adult about it, I can arrange that. And I can't tell you the number of times that my phone has rung, and it's been one of my kids saying, I need to hand the phone to my friend because he or she is going through a really hard time and they want to talk to you about it. And that is a very, very powerful way of breaking the silence. So I'd encourage all of you to talk to your children about it as openly as possible, so they know it's like an immunity, so that they won't be victims themselves, and so they can help their friends.
So Leslie, I'm realizing that time has flown. I do want to ask you a couple more questions, but in case I'm seeing that some people are needing to go, I want to just give some practical information. First of all, I wanted to remind everyone that there is a cocktail on the 12th in Milan. I don't know the details, but that is happening. It is at 7:00 for those that are in Milan, but I don't see where it is. Baltic Bar in Via Gorani at 7:00. So Baltic Bar. Also, that we have been recording this webinar, and so you can see this on the YouTube channel of the club, and they could also send you a link if you want one. Wharton Club Italy at google.com. So this is just practical information I did want to give you before anybody jumps off this webinar. And Leslie, I didn't, of course, ask all the questions that were asked, but, there were a lot of, thank you so much for sharing. This is, super interesting and, an amazing story that it's very helpful that you have decided to speak out, and how much that has probably helped so many people without you even knowing. So just a couple of last questions. One was, if you notice something in Italy that's different, it's kind of a hard question because it's probably really long a long answer, but if you can summarize, if you see some big differences in terms of whether there is as much violence here. We are seeing it, of course, if we know what the differences are to the States.
So there are very few substantial differences between countries in terms of violence against women. You would think that there would be, that maybe less advanced countries would have more of it. In some ways that is true. And there are some religious traditions that, believe it or not, actually encourage abuse of women and control of women. But in general, this is a problem that happens everywhere. And it is shockingly similar across cultures. Now, Italy is, you have a female prime minister. That's very important, whether you agree with her politics or not. It's important that she is a prominent woman. Women are doing so much in Italy that is so incredibly impressive. And with that comes greater willingness to talk about issues that matter more to women. And I believe that is why you are hearing so much about these tragedies that have happened to Italian women recently, why the movie has done so well. It's not that Italy is experiencing more domestic violence. It's that people are talking about it more and protesting and leading marches and calling for greater awareness. And that is a wonderful, wonderful thing. And I wouldn't in any way say that Italy is in front of or behind the United States. It's not that simple. This is a battle that all of us have to fight, and all of us have to be together in fighting in terms of removing the shame about it, the shame for victims and perpetrators, the shame for children, and just being willing to talk about it and to normalize it, because it happens in so many places. And I also want to say, because I know that we are running out of time, first of all, I could talk about this all night, as you can see. I'm very open about it. And so if you want to continue this conversation with me, please come on Monday, or just send me an email or send me a social media message. My website is Leslie Books. At Leslie Books is my social media tag. My Facebook name, which is, it's open and public, is Leslie Morgan Steiner. And I love to continue to have these conversations. And I also want to say, I know we're going to get to a couple more questions, but I just want to thank again, Claudia, you, Paolo, Emanuele, the Wharton Club, the Penn Club. This is not an easy subject to tackle. And I feel like you all were really, really brave in tackling it. And I'm just very grateful, because you make a big difference. Even just in 1 hour, you make a huge difference.
Thanks, Leslie. And I'm seeing that now Emanuele just posted, Leslie and I are going to be together again also on the 12th on Monday. That's before the drink. So in the afternoon at 3 o'clock, there is a W Leadership is what it's called. It's on the heels of this show that we are doing at Class CNBC, interviewing women, leading women in business and finance. And this conference is about a 3-hour conference, and Leslie and I will be speaking there, and it's open to anybody, that is interested in this topic. So he has kindly put that invitation there, as you can see on the chat. And, I guess this kind of concludes this webinar, but, I would like to ask you one last thing, Leslie, if you can just say one thing to someone that is either going through this now or has a daughter, a sister, a friend that is in a situation like this. And it's hard to summarize that as well, but what should they be doing if there's one takeaway that they can get tonight?
So the most important thing is to find somebody you trust and confide in them, because abuse thrives only in silence. Any kind of abuse, it is enabled by silence. Mm-hmm. And it's a very powerful and simple thing. Not easy, but simple to tell somebody, whether it's somebody who you work with, somebody in your family, a colleague, somebody in law enforcement, or you can call the hotline and speak anonymously, or you can send an email to me. It's really empowering just to break the silence, because in some ways what you're doing is you're telling the truth to yourself, and you're breaking through your own denial, and you are taking a stand and saying, I don't deserve this. This isn't right. And that's really important. And that's what I did that night when I called the police, is I said, no matter how much I love him and want to help him, I have to put myself first. And by breaking the silence, you're putting yourself first. And so that's what I would encourage anybody to do, whether you're a victim yourself, whether you're a perpetrator and you're willing to admit that, or if you're a bystander who thinks something is going wrong, is talk about it. This is the rare kind of social problem that is alleviated simply by talking about it.
And you have definitely talked about it. So Leslie, thank you. Thanks so much. Thank you for being with us tonight.
Thank you all so very, very, very much.
Paolo?
No, just wanted to thank you, Claudia, for the amazing job. Leslie, you know we love you, so
Oh, thank
there's
you.
not much thing we can say. I really feel bad. I wish I knew. And it was really, I mean, I was impressed by Kevin. He didn't know as well. I mean, so I don't know what to say.
You know, I think it's a great note to end on, Paolo, is that you all didn't know. And so what that means is some of you listening here, probably all of us, know people who are being abused and we don't realize it. So look carefully and trust your instincts and don't be afraid to ask somebody about it, because you could be saving their life.
And as said, if it happened to you and you are not the traditional, allow me, now well-educated person, and as you said, there is not any external sign. So thank you for taking the courage of coming out. And Claudia, you're just amazing.
Oh, thank you. Wonderful.
Thank you to everybody.
Grazie.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Ciao, ciao.